Hi, I'm Professor Jeff Cunningham of Arizona State University and host of Iconic Voices. Our icon of the day is Michael Milken, named one of the 75 most influential people of the 21st century. Welcome, Michael.
It's great to see you. One of the great challenges for America and its future today lies in two areas. It lies in one of prevention, wellness, and healthcare. The physique of America has totally changed. And so the main driver of the world's economy for the last 200 years is either public health or medical research. It is accountable for more than 50% of all growth. So in America, we have totally changed our physique in the last 2 decades. America has become obese. And people might not remember, but there was not one football player in the National Football League that weighed over 300 pounds. It's amazing that people even watched thinking there's not one football player that weighs over 300 pounds. Today, there's more than 400 players in professional football that weigh over 300 pounds. And you go to a high school football game, you can find an offensive line in some of the leading high school teams where the entire offensive line averages more than 300 pounds. My high school football team, which won the city title here in Los Angeles and was one of the greatest high school football teams of all time, I had first team, all-city offensive linemen that weighed less than 200 pounds on the team. And so when you step back and think about what's occurred, and that's not just football, but in America, it's due to a number of factors we could talk about, what's happened with the food chain, what we eat, the remote control, the automatic garage opener, sitting at your computers, etc. But we've discovered that 70% of all healthcare costs are related to lifestyle, not to heredity. And now that recent studies show that you can actually change your genes, within a decade, you might not be able to blame anything on your parents. It'll be all how you conducted your life. And so this is a challenge to America. And we estimate it costs the United States $1 trillion a year, this change in weight, just in 7 chronic diseases. So if you're concerned you might not get cancer in your lifetime, if you gain weight, you can substantially increase your chances of getting cancer. The second area is education. And it links to your comments on housing, Jeff. The rate of return on residential housing adjusted for inflation in the last 120 years, based on the work of Nobel Prize winner Shiller, is 0. If you'd invested in the stock market index, adjusted for inflation, you have 1,000 times your money. So it is no surprise why America's middle class has one of the lowest median net worths of any developed country in the world. Our middle class has been bribed, coerced into putting their investments in residential housing, thinking that's the best investment. And instead of a home for your family to grow up. And so the size of the middle class family home has increased dramatically. The square footage per person has increased dramatically as the number of people have gone down. And people put their life savings into a piece of real estate. And so the number one allocation for the middle class in America today is towards their house. The second is towards their car. 50% of the income of the middle class in America goes to their house and their car. 2% goes to supplemental education. Now, I just came from Asia, where the number one allocation in Asia is food for the middle class. The number 2 is education. So they spend as much on supplemental education, tutoring, private school. 80% of the kids in Korea go to school after school. 55% of the kids in the middle class in China go to English language schools after their Chinese schools. And so the priorities have switched in America. And as the house and the car becomes more important than the education of your child, it's a real challenge to our future. We should never forget that the United States of America, and maybe Great Britain, and maybe even Rome at one period of time, were the greatest civilizations that mankind has known. And if we go back farther, the Egyptians were well ahead of their time. America is changing its face peacefully. Other countries would not, I believe, be able to do what America has. The majority of Americans will find that their ancestors came from Latin America or Asia. It's only a matter of time. 70% of everything that happens in our country, good and bad, starts in the state of California. And so in California today, as of a year or so ago, the number one ethnic group in the state of California are individuals whose ancestors came from Latin America. Not from Europe, but from Latin America. The fastest growing ethnic group in the state of California are people whose ancestors came from Asia. And so the vast majority today of Californians, the majority of their ancestors came from Latin America and Asia. And someday, the entire country will find itself that the majority of our citizens, in a democracy, the majority of our voters, their ancestors came from Latin America and Asia. And I'm assuming that, speaking of education, that the textbooks will be rewritten, and your grandchildren and my grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren will study more of the history of Asia and Latin America than they might of Europe when we went to school. So from the first standpoint, America is changing its face, and it's changing its face peacefully. 50% of all the scientists and engineers in Silicon Valley were not born in the United States, 50%. If I look at our largest early child care education company that we have, location of that company, and we're the largest provider through KinderCare and Children's Creative Learning Centers and Cambridge and others of early child care education in America. Our largest center is in Silicon Valley. In that center, more than 50% of our children, one of their parents was born in India. 15% of every company founded in Silicon Valley, the CEO was born in India. So we have benefited. Millions of jobs have been created by immigration. And so I'm a big supporter of changing the face. And I also believe that Americans are very competitive. Okay, they always say, our team won. You can ask, what's your association with the team? Well, I live in that city, whoever your team is. And I believe the commitment to education that Asian Americans have, and the highest performing group today is Korean Americans in terms of their commitment to education. I think they serve within a very competitive force for people to raise the level of their game. So I believe that's a positive, a real positive to our society. The challenge to our society is something that we all know, and I think this is part of being an innovator or changing the course of history, is that I believe most of us can tell the future, what's going to happen. We just don't know when, but what's eventually going to occur. And so we know that the majority of Americans will eventually have their ancestry come from Latin America and Asia. A couple generations ago, 80% of everyone that was not born in America came from Europe or Canada. Today, more than 80% of everyone not born in America came from Latin America and Asia. So it's inevitable. So let's step back and think about the challenge. If education is the most important thing to middle-class parents in 11 Asian countries, then their children are going to receive better and better education. There are 6 children in India for every child in the United States. There are 5 children in China for every child in the United States. So therefore, if our children are only competing against the top 10% in China and India, there are more children in the top 10% in India and China than the U.S. And so this, to me, is kind of a call to action to focus on education and also the questions of inequality in a world of technology.